I'm going to tell you something that's been eating me alive for the past month, and honestly, I need you all to understand that every single thing I'm about to do is completely justified. Some of you will probably tell me to be the bigger person or whatever, but save it. I've been planning this for 5 years, and watching it unfold is the only thing keeping me sane right now. 5 years ago, I left home at 22. Not for college, not for some great opportunity, just to get out. My family never understood why I wanted to leave our hometown. We lived in this upper-middle-class bubble where everyone knew everyone, and my parents spent their entire lives obsessed with how things looked to other people. My dad, Stephen, worked in sales management. My mom, Brittany, ran a boutique that her parents bankrolled, and they both acted like we were some kind of dynasty. My older brother, Kyle, was in medical school, and my younger sister, Noelle, was starting at a private university. Then there was me, James, the middle kid, who wanted to do something different. I told them I was moving to another state to work in tech. Not programming or anything fancy, just basic IT support at a startup. The reaction was immediate and brutal. My mom actually laughed in my face and told me I was throwing my life away to become a glorified janitor for computers. My dad said I was embarrassing the family by choosing such a pathetic career path when I could have gone to business school like him. Kyle called me an idiot for not following a respectable profession. Noelle just looked at me with this disgusted expression and said I was going to end up as the family failure. But here's the thing they didn't know. The thing I never told them, because I wanted them to sit in their own ignorance. I wasn't going to stay in basic IT support. I had plans, real plans. And I spent the next 5 years executing them while they probably forgot I existed. I worked my way up. Started at that startup doing support, learned everything I could about the systems, moved into network administration, then got certifications in cybersecurity. By year 3, I was consulting. By year 4, I had my own client base. By year 5, I was making more than my dad ever did in sales, and I owned my house outright in a city 3 states away. No mortgage, no debt, just me, and a career that I built from nothing while they assumed I was scrubbing toilets or whatever scenario they'd invented in their heads. During those 5 years, I didn't visit home once. I didn't call for holidays. When my mom texted me twice in year 2 asking if I was still alive, I sent back a thumbs up emoji and nothing else. They never reached out again. I watched their Facebook posts, though. Every single one. Kyle graduated medical school and started his residency. Noelle got engaged to some finance guy. My parents posted constantly about their perfect children and their perfect lives. I was never mentioned. Not once. It was like I'd been erased. And you know what? I was fine with that. More than fine. Every time I saw them bragging about Kyle or posting photos of Noelle's engagement party, I felt this cold satisfaction knowing that they had no idea what I was doing. They thought I was struggling somewhere, probably living in some rundown apartment. Definitely not worth their time. That image they had of me as the family failure was something I wanted them to keep believing until the exact right moment. Last month, I decided it was time. I'd been thinking about going back for a while, but I wanted to wait until I had everything in place. Everything. I'm talking about financial independence, professional success, and most importantly, leverage. Because I knew that eventually, they'd need something from me. That's how people like my family operate. They only care about you when you have something they want. I drove home on a Thursday afternoon. Didn't tell anyone I was coming. Just showed up at the house I grew up in. The same oversized colonial that my parents loved showing off to their neighbors. I parked my truck in the driveway, walked up to the front door, and rang the bell. When I heard footsteps inside, I actually felt myself smile for the first time in weeks. This was it. This was the moment I'd been building toward for 5 solid years. My mom opened the door. She looked at me for a full 3 seconds before recognition hit her face, and then her expression twisted into something between shock and disgust. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. The first words out of her mouth were a sneer about whether I came to clean their toilets because that's all I was good for. I just stood there. Didn't react, didn't move. I wanted to hear all of it. My dad appeared behind her, and when he saw me, he actually laughed. He made some joke about the family janitor returning and asked if I was there to sweep their driveway. Kyle walked into the hallway holding his phone up, and I realized he was filming me. He was standing there recording me while announcing to whoever was watching that their loser brother thought he belonged there, and maybe they'd let me wash their cars for $5. Noelle came down the stairs, took one look at my clothes, and made a comment about my ratty shoes tracking poverty into their house. She suggested I use the servants' entrance. My mom added that my cousins were all doctors now, and I'd be lucky to mop their offices. My dad reached into his pocket, pulled out some coins, and threw them at me. He told me it was bus fare home, or maybe I could use it to buy soap because I smelled like failure. They were howling with laughter, all 4 of them. standing there in the doorway of the house I grew up in, treating me like I was some kind of street beggar who'd wandered onto their property. And the whole time I didn't say a single word. I just looked at each of them, memorized every detail of their smug faces, and turned around. I walked back to my truck, got in, and drove away while they kept laughing behind me. The entire visit lasted maybe 20 minutes. 20 minutes of pure, concentrated humiliation that they clearly thought was the funniest thing that had ever happened. Here's what they didn't know, what they couldn't have known because they never bothered to ask. I wasn't there to reconnect. I wasn't there hoping for some kind of family reunion. I was there to see if they'd changed at all. If there was even a small chance they'd grown into decent human beings who might treat their own son with basic respect. They failed that test spectacularly. The drive back to my place took 6 hours, and I spent every minute of it thinking about what came next. Because here's the thing about my family that I learned growing up. Everything they have is built on appearances and connections and other people's money. My dad's sales job depends entirely on his network and his reputation in that small town. My mom's boutique has been failing for years, and she keeps it afloat through loans from her parents and maintaining this image of success. Kyle's medical career is impressive, sure, but he's drowning in student debt and living off my parents' support during his residency. Noelle's finance guy fiance comes from money, and that entire engagement is basically a business arrangement between families. They're all propped up by this interconnected web of dependence, reputation, and borrowed status. And I knew every single weak point because I grew up watching them build this house of cards. The day after I got home, I started making calls. Not to them, obviously, to other people. People who mattered in ways my family didn't understand yet. I'd spent 5 years not just building my career, but building connections. Real ones. The kind that actually matter when you need something done. See, my family thinks success is about showing off and looking important. They never understood that real power is quiet. It's knowing who to call when you need information. It's having the skills to find things out that people don't want you to know. It's understanding systems and how they work and where the pressure points are. I'm not going to do anything illegal. I want to be very clear about that. Everything I'm planning is completely above board. But legal doesn't mean nice, and it definitely doesn't mean they're going to enjoy what happens next. 3 days after my visit, my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was Kyle. He'd gotten my new number somehow, probably from my mom's old texts, and he was calling to tell me that he'd posted the video of me standing at their door on his Instagram story. He thought I should know that all their friends had seen it, and everyone agreed I looked pathetic. Then he hung up. That video existing was perfect, better than I could have planned, because it meant there was documented evidence of exactly how they treated me, and I saved that story before it expired. I saved everything. My mom tried calling 2 days later from her cell. I didn't answer, but she left a voicemail. She wanted to know if I was upset about my visit, and she said that maybe I should understand they were just joking around. She said I always took things too seriously and needed to learn to laugh at myself. Then she mentioned that, actually, since I was doing so well for myself clearly, maybe I could help Kyle with some of his student loans because family helps family. I deleted the voicemail after transcribing every word of it. That's when I knew. They'd somehow found out what I was actually doing for a living. Someone must have told them. Or maybe they finally bothered to do a basic search. Whatever happened, they suddenly realized that the family failure they'd spent 20 minutes mocking wasn't actually a failure at all. And now they wanted something. The thing is, I'd been preparing for this exact scenario. I knew that eventually my success would become visible to them, and I knew exactly what they'd do when they found out. They'd want money. They'd want help. They'd want to suddenly pretend like they'd always supported me, and this was all just family banter. But I also knew something they didn't. I'd been quietly looking into their financial situations for the past year. Not hacking, nothing illegal, just using public records and professional connections to understand exactly how precarious their lives actually were. My dad's sales numbers had been declining for 3 years. My mom's boutique was on its 3rd loan from her elderly parents. Kyle was making minimum resident salary while sitting on $200,000 in student debt. Noelle's wedding was being funded almost entirely by her fiancé's family, and my parents had taken out a loan to cover their portion. They were all broke, every single one of them. The house had a second mortgage, the cars were leased, the lifestyle was completely fake, held together by credit and borrowed money, and the desperate hope that everything would somehow work out. And I had the ability to make things very difficult for all of them without breaking a single law. So here's where it gets interesting and why I'm posting this now, because I need you all to understand what I'm about to do and why it's completely justified after what they put me through. I'm going to call in every connection I have to make sure certain information reaches certain people. I'm going to make sure my dad's professional reputation takes hits it can't recover from. I'm going to ensure my mom's boutique loses the relationships it depends on. I'm going to let Kyle's financial situation become widely known in ways that affect his professional prospects. I'm going to make absolutely certain that Noel's future in-laws understand exactly what kind of family they're marrying into. And I'm going to do it all without ever speaking to my family directly again. They think I'm weak. They think I'm the failure who couldn't make it. They spent 5 years forgetting I existed, and then 20 minutes proving they never cared about me at all. Now they're going to spend however long it takes watching everything they built fall apart, and they're going to know it's because of me. They're going to know that the family janitor they mocked has more power over their lives than they ever imagined possible. I started making the first moves yesterday. I'll update you all when things start happening, because trust me, they're going to get desperate soon, and when they do, when they finally understand what I'm capable of, I'm going to be right here documenting every single moment of their panic. They wanted to treat me like garbage? Fine. Now they get to see what happens when the garbage learns to bite back. Update 1. Okay, so I promised I'd update you all when things started happening, and holy hell, they are happening. I'm writing this at 11 p.m. on a Saturday because I literally cannot sleep with how fast everything is moving. And I need to get this all down while it's fresh because you're not going to believe some of this. First, let me address some comments from my last post. Yes, I know some of you think I should just move on and live my best life without them. I appreciate the sentiment, I really do. But you don't understand. These people spent 5 years acting like I didn't exist. And then when I finally showed up, they spent 20 minutes treating me like actual trash for their own entertainment. They filmed it. Kyle posted it online for people to laugh at. This isn't about being the bigger person anymore. This is about making sure they understand exactly what they did and exactly what it costs. And to the person who said I should focus on my own happiness instead of revenge, my happiness is watching them squirm. I've spent 5 years building a life specifically so I could be in this position. Every certification I earned, every client I landed, every connection I made, it was all leading to this moment. So buckle up, because I'm just getting started. Here's what's happened since my last post. Remember how I mentioned I was going to start making moves? Well, I started with the easiest target, my mom's boutique. Her shop is one of those places that survives entirely on reputation and wealthy clientele. She sells overpriced clothing to women who want to feel exclusive, and the whole business model depends on maintaining this image of sophistication and success. I happen to know 3 of her biggest regular customers, not personally, but through professional connections. One of them is married to a guy I did consulting work for last year. Another one is the sister of a client I still work with. The third one is someone I met at a networking event who specifically mentioned shopping at a boutique in my hometown that matched my mom's description. I didn't lie to any of them. I didn't make anything up. I just let it slip in casual conversation that the boutique owner was my mother. And then I mentioned how interesting it was that she was operating a business while being deeply in debt to her elderly parents and running on her 3rd loan in 5 years. I mentioned how the whole storefront was basically a vanity project funded by family money, and how precarious the financial situation actually was. That's it, just the truth, just facts that anyone could find out if they looked hard enough. And I made sure to mention it to exactly the right people who would absolutely tell their friends. Within a week, 2 of those 3 women stopped shopping there. They didn't make a big announcement or anything. They just quietly stopped coming in. And in a small town where everyone talks, that kind of thing gets noticed immediately. My mom called me 4 days ago. Not from her cell this time, from the boutique's business line, which meant she was desperate enough to try any number she had. I didn't answer, but she left a voicemail asking me to please call her back because she needed to talk to me about something important. She said she knew we'd had a rough visit, but that family was family, and we needed to work through our issues. The tone was so fake it made me want to throw my phone. This woman spent 5 years not caring if I was alive or dead, mocked me to my face when I showed up, and now suddenly we need to work through our issues. Right, sure, I didn't call back. Instead, I moved on to phase 2. My dad's sales job is based entirely on his network of connections and his reputation as a reliable, successful guy who knows everyone worth knowing. He works for a mid-sized company selling industrial equipment, and his whole strategy is built on relationships he's maintained for 20-plus years. People buy from him because they trust him, because he's positioned himself as this pillar of the community who would never steer them wrong. So I started asking questions, professional questions. I reached out to some people in adjacent industries, people who might have mutual connections with my dad's network, and I asked about his company's performance. I asked about reliability issues. I asked about customer satisfaction. And when people gave me information, I made sure to mention that Steven from sales had been telling people his numbers were better than they actually were. I made sure to point out discrepancies between what he'd been claiming and what the actual data showed. Again, nothing illegal, nothing even that unusual in business. Just making sure the right information reached the right ears. Making sure people started asking questions about whether my dad was as reliable as he claimed to be. The call started 3 days ago. My dad tried reaching me from his cell, from his work line, from my mom's phone. I didn't answer any of them, but I listened to every voicemail. And let me tell you, the progression was fascinating. First voicemail, "Hey James, it's Dad. Give me a call when you get a chance. Need to talk to you about something." Second voicemail, "James, this is your father. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to call me back immediately." Third voicemail, "You think you're clever? You think I don't know what you're doing? Call me back right now or you're going to regret this." Fourth voicemail, "Listen, son, I think we got off on the wrong foot when you visited. Your mother and I would like to talk to you about clearing the air. We didn't realize you were so sensitive about some jokes. Let's have dinner and work this out." That last one came from my mom's phone, but it was definitely my dad talking. The shift from threatening me to suddenly wanting to have dinner and work things out happened in less than 12 hours. That's how fast his situation was deteriorating. But here's where things get really interesting and why I'm writing this update now instead of waiting longer. Because my family isn't stupid, and they're not just going to roll over and accept what I'm doing. They're fighting back, and they're doing it in ways I didn't fully anticipate. My Aunt Renee called me yesterday, my mom's older sister, someone I actually had a decent relationship with growing up. She still lives in my hometown, and she's always been the reasonable one in the family. I answered her call because I genuinely didn't expect her to be involved in this. She told me she'd heard I'd visited home recently and that things hadn't gone well. She said my mom had called her crying, talking about how I'd shown up and then gotten upset over some teasing and now I was trying to ruin their lives. She said Brittany was beside herself with worry and that Steven was so stressed he might have health problems and that I needed to think about what I was doing to my family. I let her talk for about 5 minutes before I interrupted and asked if she'd seen the video Kyle posted. She admitted she had, but she said that was just siblings being siblings and that I should understand they didn't mean anything by it. I asked her if she'd throw coins at her own son and tell him he smelled like failure. She got quiet for a moment, then said that parents sometimes push their kids in harsh ways and that my parents had always wanted the best for me. That's when I lost it a little bit. I told her everything, the 5 years of silence, the complete erasure of my existence from their lives, the fact that they only reached out when they thought I might have money to give them. I told her about my mom's voicemail asking me to help Kyle with his student loans, right after spending 20 minutes mocking me. I told her about my dad's sales numbers being fake and my mom's boutique being held together with borrowed money. She tried to interrupt a few times, but I kept going. I explained that I hadn't done anything illegal, hadn't lied about anyone, had just made sure certain truths reached certain people. I told her that if my family was suffering consequences, it was because those consequences were always waiting to happen, and I'd just sped up the timeline. She said I was being cruel. She said that family forgives each other and that I was destroying people's lives over hurt feelings. She said my grandparents were getting old and didn't need this stress, and that my mom's boutique was their legacy to her, and I was threatening that. I told her the boutique was a failing business kept afloat by elderly people's retirement money, and that maybe someone should have questioned that arrangement years ago. Then I hung up. That call messed me up more than I expected it to. Not because I felt guilty, but because I realized my family was going to try to use every single person in our extended family to get to me. Renee wasn't the only one who called. I've gotten messages on social media from cousins I haven't spoken to in a decade. People are coming out of the woodwork telling me to forgive my family, to let things go, to stop whatever I'm doing. And the worst part? Most of them don't even know the full story. They've just heard my mom's version, which apparently involves me being overly sensitive and vindictive. She's telling everyone that she made some light jokes when I visited, and now I'm trying to destroy the family business out of spite. But you know what I find interesting? None of these people calling me to forgive my family ever called me in the past 5 years to check if I was okay. None of them wondered why I stopped coming home or why I went silent. They only care now because my family is facing consequences. And suddenly I'm the bad guy for not rolling over and accepting their treatment. Kyle sent me a message through Instagram 2 days ago. Long message, lots of capital letters. He told me he knew I was spreading rumors about the family and that if I didn't stop, he was going to make sure everyone knew what a vindictive psycho I was. He said I was jealous of his success and bitter about my own failures, and that I needed to grow up and stop acting like a child throwing a tantrum. I screenshotted the whole thing and saved it. Then I blocked him on Instagram. Not because I'm afraid of him, but because I'm done giving them platforms to reach me. Noelle tried a different approach. She sent me a DM on Facebook pretending like she wanted to reconnect as siblings. She said she'd always looked up to me and that she was sorry if she'd said anything hurtful during my visit. She said she was getting married soon and would love for me to be there and that maybe we could talk about everything and clear the air before her big day. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost funny. She doesn't want to reconnect. She wants to make sure I don't do anything to embarrass the family before her wedding. She wants to neutralize me as a threat because she's terrified I'm going to say something to her future in-laws. And honestly, I haven't decided yet if I'm going to reach out to them or not. Her fiancé's family is old money, and they're very particular about reputation and social standing. They probably have no idea that Noelle's parents are drowning in debt, and that the wedding they're partially funding is the only thing keeping my parents afloat financially. It would be very interesting if they found out, but that's a decision for later. Right now, I'm dealing with the immediate situation, which is that my entire extended family is mobilizing to try to stop me. My grandparents called last night, both of them on speakerphone, which meant my mom was probably sitting right there coaching them. My grandfather told me that he was disappointed in me for hurting my mother, and that whatever issues I had should be worked out privately within the family. My grandmother said she didn't understand why I would want to cause problems for my parents when they'd always provided for me and given me everything I needed growing up. I asked her if providing for someone meant you got to treat them like garbage forever. She said I was being dramatic and that my mother told her I was spreading lies about their financial situation. I told her I wasn't spreading lies, I was sharing facts, and if those facts were embarrassing, then maybe they should have made better choices. She said I was ungrateful and that I'd always been too sensitive for my own good. That last comment hit me hard because I've heard variations of it my entire life. Anytime I reacted to their treatment of me, anytime I got upset about being compared unfavorably to Kyle or mocked for my choices, I was too sensitive. I was too emotional. I couldn't take a joke. It was always my fault for reacting instead of their fault for how they treated me. So I told my grandparents that I loved them, but I wasn't going to have this conversation anymore. I said if they wanted to understand what actually happened, they could ask to see the video Kyle posted of my visit. Then I ended the call. I'm not blocking everyone. That's important. I want them to be able to reach me. I want them to keep trying to convince me to stop. Because every attempt they make just proves how desperate they're getting. Every voicemail, every message, every cousin who reaches out to tell me I'm being too harsh, it all confirms that what I'm doing is working. My dad's sales numbers are being questioned by his company. 2 of his major clients have started asking for different sales reps. My mom's boutique had its slowest week in 5 years. Kyle is facing questions about his financial stability from someone at his hospital who apparently thinks residents shouldn't have that level of debt visibility. Noelle's wedding planning is becoming stressful because my parents keep having to admit they can't afford certain things they'd promised. And I haven't done anything except tell the truth to people who deserve to know it. That's what kills me about all these messages telling me to stop. They're not asking my family to apologize for how they treated me. They're asking me to stop defending myself and let them continue pretending everything is fine. Here's the thing, though, and this is what's keeping me up tonight. I got a call from a number I didn't recognize this afternoon. When I answered, it was my mom's father, my grandfather, calling from a different phone. He didn't have my grandmother with him this time, and he wasn't on speakerphone. He asked me if we could meet in person to talk, just the 2 of us. He said he wanted to understand what happened and that he'd been thinking about some things I'd said. I told him I'd think about it, and I have been thinking about it because my grandfather is the one funding my mom's boutique, and if he's starting to have doubts about that arrangement, then everything accelerates faster than I planned. But I'm also wondering if this is a trap. If my mom put him up to this to get me in person where they can ambush me with the whole family and try to guilt me into backing down. Or maybe he's genuine, and he's starting to realize that his daughter has been lying about a lot of things. I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out because I didn't spend 5 years planning this just to back down now when it's finally working. The family janitor is dismantling everything they built, one connection at a time, and they're starting to understand that all their money and status and reputation means nothing when the foundation underneath it was rotten from the start. More updates coming soon. This is far from over. Update 2. All right, this update is going to be long because so much has happened in the past week and a half that I can barely process it all. Those of you following along know I was debating whether to meet with my grandfather or not. Well, I did it. And what came out of that meeting has basically set off a nuclear bomb in my family that's still detonating. Before I get into the meeting, I need to give you some context about my grandfather that I didn't mention before. He's 83, retired from running a successful regional distribution business, and he's always been the kind of guy who values hard work and honesty above everything else. He built his company from nothing back in the 60s and sold it for a good amount before he retired. That money has been supporting various family members ever since, including my mom's boutique. When he called asking to meet, I spent 2 days going back and forth about whether it was worth the risk. But then I realized something. If he was reaching out separately from my grandmother, without my mom obviously listening in, then maybe he'd actually seen through some of their nonsense. And if there was anyone in the family who might understand why I did what I did, it would be someone who built something real instead of just pretending to have success. So I agreed to meet him. Not in my hometown, though. I told him to drive to a diner about 40 minutes away, halfway between where I live now and where they all are. I picked a Wednesday afternoon, middle of the week, when it would be quiet and I could see if anyone followed him or if this was an ambush. I got there early and sat in my truck watching the parking lot. My grandfather showed up alone in his old pickup, the same one he's been driving for 15 years even though he could afford something newer. That was actually a good sign. He walked into the diner moving slow but steady, and I waited 5 more minutes to make sure no one else pulled in behind him. When I walked in, he was already sitting in a booth near the back with coffee in front of him. He looked older than I remembered, more tired, and when he saw me his expression was hard to read. Not angry, not happy, just serious. I slid into the booth across from him and we sat there for a moment not saying anything. Then he asked me to tell him everything that happened during my visit home. Not my mom's version, not what people were saying, but what actually happened from my perspective. So I told him. Every detail. The comments at the door, the coins my dad threw at me, Kyle filming it, Noelle's remarks about my shoes, all of it. I pulled out my phone and showed him the video that Kyle had posted before deleting it. Because yes, I saved that. He watched the whole thing without saying a word. When it finished, he set my phone down and asked why I hadn't come home in 5 years. So I explained that too. How they'd reacted when I said I was leaving for IT work. How they'd called me an embarrassment and a failure. How I'd spent 5 years building a career and a life while they never once reached out to see if I was okay. How they'd erased me from their lives completely until my mom suddenly wanted me to help Kyle with his student loans. My grandfather listened to all of it. Then he asked what I'd been doing since that visit to cause so many problems for everyone. I was honest with him. I told him I'd shared factual information about their financial situations with people who had a right to know. I told him I'd made sure certain truths reached certain ears. I told him I hadn't lied about anything or done anything illegal, just accelerated consequences that were always going to happen eventually. He sat back and was quiet for a long time. Then he said something I wasn't expecting. He told me he'd had his suspicions about my mom's boutique for years, but my grandmother always defended it as giving Brittany purpose and independence. He said he'd kept funding it because he didn't want to create family conflict, but he'd been watching the numbers and knew it was never going to be profitable. He said lending her money for the 3rd time last year had bothered him more than he'd admitted to anyone. Then he asked me directly how much I knew about their finances. I told him probably more than he did, and I laid it all out. The second mortgage on my parents' house, the leased cars, Kyle's debt situation, the loan my parents took out for Noelle's wedding that they couldn't actually afford. The fact that my dad's haunt sales territory had been shrinking for 3 years, and he'd been hiding it by inflating his numbers to corporate and to the family. My grandfather's face did something I'd never seen before. He looked exhausted and angry at the same time, like he'd been carrying suspicions for years, and I'd just confirmed all of them. He asked how I knew about the wedding loan, and I told him that when you work in cybersecurity and information systems, you learn how to find things that people think are hidden. Public records, credit reports, professional connections. It's all out there if you know where to look. He wanted to know why I was doing this, why I couldn't just walk away and live my own life without causing problems. And I told him the truth, which is that I spent 5 years walking away. And the moment I came back to test if anything had changed, they proved they were still the same people who valued appearance over reality and status over family. I told him they'd had a chance to treat me like a human being, and they chose to mock me instead. I told him that every consequence they were facing now was something they built for themselves, and I was just making sure the foundation cracked a little faster. He said I was being vindictive. I agreed completely. I told him that vindictive didn't mean wrong, and that I'd earned the right to be vindictive after how they treated me. He asked what I wanted out of all this, what my endgame was, and I told him I wanted them to understand that actions have consequences and that they couldn't treat people like garbage and expect those people to protect them later. Then he asked the question I'd been waiting for. He wanted to know if I was going to stop. I told him no. I told him I was going to keep going until they genuinely understood what they'd done, not just until they wanted me to stop causing problems. He said that might mean they lose everything, and I said that maybe everything they had wasn't real in the first place. We sat there for another 20 minutes talking about family and responsibility and whether I was obligated to protect people who'd hurt me just because we shared DNA. He told me I reminded him of himself at my age, which I don't think was meant as a compliment. Then he said he was going to stop funding my mom's boutique. Just like that. He said he'd been propping up a failing business for too long and enabling financial irresponsibility, and that he wasn't going to do it anymore. I asked if he was doing that because of what I told him or because he'd already been thinking about it. He said both. He said I'd confirmed things he'd suspected, and that our conversation made him realize he'd been part of the problem by preventing natural consequences from happening. When we left the diner, he told me he didn't approve of what I was doing, but he understood why I was doing it. Then he drove away, and I sat in my truck for a while processing what had just happened, because I'd gone into that meeting prepared to defend myself, and instead, I'd accidentally convinced my grandfather to pull his financial support from my mom's business. That was going to cause an immediate crisis that I hadn't specifically planned for, and I needed to think about how to handle it. I didn't have to wait long to find out. My mom called me the next day completely hysterical. She was crying and screaming and barely making sense, but the core message was that my grandfather had told her he wasn't giving her any more money, and that I was responsible for poisoning him against her. She said I'd destroyed her business and her relationship with her father, and that I was a spiteful monster who couldn't stand to see anyone else succeed. She said I'd always been jealous of Kyle and Noelle and that I was taking out my failures on the whole family. I let her talk until she ran out of steam. Then I asked her one question. Did she really think her business was successful? Or did she just like pretending it was while her father paid for everything? She started yelling again about how dare I question her work and her dedication, and I hung up. Kyle called an hour later. Different approach. He tried to sound reasonable and mature, like he was the adult trying to deal with a difficult child. He said he understood I was upset about some things, but that I was handling this the wrong way. He said that families work through problems together, not by attacking each other, and that if I had legitimate grievances, then we should sit down and discuss them like adults. He said he was willing to apologize if I felt he'd been too harsh during my visit, and that we could move forward from there. The manipulation was so obvious it was insulting. He wasn't apologizing for what he did. He was saying he'd apologize if I felt he was too harsh, which puts all the blame on my feelings instead of his actions. And he only wanted to discuss things now that consequences were hitting them. I told him I'd think about meeting to talk, and he seemed to think he'd won something. He said he'd set something up and get back to me. But here's where things get complicated in ways I didn't expect. Remember how I mentioned Noelle's wedding and her future in-laws? Well, apparently someone from their family ran a basic background check on my parents as part of their due diligence for the marriage. This is something wealthy families do, I guess, when their kid is marrying someone. They want to make sure there aren't financial or legal issues that could cause problems. Noelle sent me a frantic message through Facebook saying I needed to call her immediately. It was an emergency, and that I'd ruined her entire life. When I called her back, she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Apparently, her fiancé's parents had discovered the debt situation, the mortgage, the failing boutique, all of it. And they'd had a conversation with Noelle and her fiancé about whether this was really the right time to get married, given the financial instability of her family. She was sobbing about how her wedding might not happen, how her fiancé's parents were questioning everything, how I'd destroyed the most important day of her life. I asked her why she thought this was my fault instead of our parents' fault for creating this situation in the first place. She said that our parents' financial issues were private family business, and I had no right to make them public. I pointed out that I hadn't told her future in-laws anything. They'd done their own research and found out themselves. She said that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't started spreading information around town because now people were talking and asking questions and it got back to them. I asked her what she wanted me to do about it, and she begged me to talk to them and explain that everything was fine, that our parents were financially stable, that there was no reason to worry. I told her I wasn't going to lie for our parents. She started yelling about how I was a selfish person who only cared about revenge and didn't care who I hurt in the process. I reminded her that she'd pointed at my shoes and suggested I use the servants' entrance when I visited. She said she was joking and that I was being ridiculous for still being upset about it. I hung up on her too. The family group chat, which I'd been removed from years ago, apparently exploded after that. My Aunt Renee reached out again to tell me that everyone was talking about how I was tearing the family apart and that my cousins were taking sides about whether I was justified or just being cruel. She said there was going to be a family gathering at my parents' house this weekend to discuss everything, and that I needed to be there. I told her I wasn't interested in being ambushed by the entire family so they could try to guilt me into backing down. She swore it wasn't an ambush, that people genuinely wanted to understand what happened and help resolve things. I didn't believe her, but I also realized this might be exactly the opportunity I'd been waiting for. A chance to tell everyone at once what my parents had done, instead of letting them control the narrative. So I told her I'd come, but I set conditions. The meeting would be at a neutral location, not my parents' house. It would be at that same diner where I met my grandfather, where I could leave whenever I wanted. And I wanted specific people there. My parents, Kyle, Noelle, my Aunt Renee, my grandparents, and no one else. Small enough to actually have a conversation instead of just being shouted at by a mob. She agreed to arrange it. She said it would be this Saturday at 2 in the afternoon. That gives me 3 days to prepare for what's probably going to be the most brutal confrontation of this entire situation. But here's the thing. I'm not going into this blind. Kyle tried something sneaky this week that I need to tell you about because it shows exactly how desperate they're getting. He reached out to one of my former colleagues from my old IT job, someone I worked with years ago when I was still doing basic support. He tried to get information about my work history and my current situation, probably looking for anything he could use against me. The colleague messaged me on LinkedIn to give me a heads up, saying some guy claiming to be my brother was asking weird questions about whether I'd had any professional problems or complaints. Kyle was trying to find dirt on me to damage my reputation. He was trying to do to me what I'd been doing to them, but he went about it in the sloppiest way possible because he doesn't understand how professional networks actually work. I thanked my colleague and let him know that yes, that was my brother. And no, he wasn't asking because he cared about my well-being. That interaction told me everything I needed to know about where Kyle's head was at. He wasn't interested in reconciliation. He was interested in finding ammunition. So now, I'm preparing for Saturday's meeting with full knowledge that they're not coming to apologize or understand. They're coming to try to neutralize me as a threat to their comfortable lives. And I'm walking in there with 5 years of anger and every fact I need to dismantle their excuses one by one. My dad's sales manager apparently called him in for a performance review yesterday. My mom's boutique is barely staying open without my grandfather's financial backing. Kyle's hospital is asking questions about his debt because someone mentioned it might affect his security clearance for certain areas of the hospital. Noelle's wedding is on shaky ground because her future in-laws don't want their family money mixing with what they see as financial instability. Everything is crumbling at once. And this Saturday meeting is their last attempt to stop it before it all collapses completely. They want me to cave. They want me to agree to stop sharing information and maybe even help them fix their situations. They probably have some kind of emotional manipulation planned, maybe bringing up old memories or trying to make me feel guilty about hurting the family. But I've been preparing for this conversation for 5 years. I know exactly what I'm going to say. I know exactly what they're going to try. And I'm going to walk into that diner ready to finish what they started when they threw coins at me and called me a failure. The family janitor is about to clean house, and they're all going to be sitting there watching while I do it. Update after Saturday's meeting coming soon. This is going to be intense. Final update. I need to get this all down while I can still think straight because the past week has been absolutely insane. And last night was something I never expected to actually see, even though I'd been working toward it for 5 years. The Saturday meeting happened. All of it. And what came out of that meeting set off a chain reaction that ended with my entire family on their knees outside my house last night begging me to fix what they broke. I'm writing this at 6 in the morning because I haven't slept, and I need you all to understand exactly how we got here. Saturday afternoon, I drove to that diner and got there 30 minutes early again. I sat in my truck watching cars pull in. My parents arrived together. Kyle showed up 10 minutes later. Noelle came with my Aunt Renee. My grandparents were the last to arrive, and I watched my grandfather help my grandmother out of their truck before walking her slowly toward the entrance. I gave it another 5 minutes to make sure no one else was coming. Then I walked in. They were all seated around 2 tables that had been pushed together near the back. The conversation stopped completely when I walked up. My mom looked like she'd been crying for days. My dad looked furious. Kyle had this practiced, neutral expression like he was ready to negotiate. Noelle couldn't even look at me. My Aunt Renee stood up and tried to hug me, but I stepped back and sat down at the end of the table. Nobody spoke for a solid minute. Then my dad started talking about how glad he was that I'd agreed to come and that we could finally have a real conversation about everything that had been happening. He said there had been a lot of miscommunication and hurt feelings on both sides, and that family needed to work through these things together. He said they wanted to understand my perspective and find a way to move forward that worked for everyone. I let him finish his whole speech. Then I asked him which part was miscommunication, the part where they mocked me at the door, or the part where he threw coins at me and told me I smelled like failure. He tried to say that was just rough humor and that I'd always been sensitive about jokes. I pulled out my phone and asked if he wanted me to play the video Kyle posted so everyone could hear exactly what kind of jokes they were making. My mom jumped in and said that yes, they'd been harsh, but they'd been surprised to see me after 5 years and they hadn't handled it well. She said they'd had time to think about it and they realized they'd hurt my feelings, and they were sorry for that. She said parents make mistakes and that she hoped I could forgive them so we could rebuild our relationship. I asked her why she never called me in 5 years if she cared about a relationship. She said she'd texted me to see if I was alive, and I'd only sent back an emoji, so she figured I didn't want contact. I pointed out that sending one text in 2 years wasn't exactly reaching out, and that she could have called any time but chose not to until she wanted something from me. She started crying and said that wasn't fair, that I was the one who left and stopped communicating. Kyle cut in and said we were getting off track, that the point was to figure out how to move forward, not to rehash the past. He said he understood that I felt disrespected, and that he took responsibility for his part in that. He said the video was a mistake and he'd deleted it, and he hoped I could accept his apology. He said he wanted to rebuild our relationship as brothers, and that we were both adults now who could move past childhood dynamics. I told him the video wasn't childhood dynamics. It happened 6 weeks ago when I was 27 years old. I told him he'd filmed me being humiliated for entertainment and posted it online for people to laugh at, and that deleting it after I started causing problems wasn't the same as being sorry. He said he was genuinely apologizing and that he hoped I could be mature enough to accept it. That's when I stopped playing nice. I looked at all of them and asked if any of them had actually thought about why I left 5 years ago. My dad said I'd left because I wanted to do IT work instead of something respectable. I asked if he remembered what he said to me when I told him my plans. He claimed he didn't remember the exact words. I told him he called my career choice pathetic and said I was embarrassing the family. My mom said that parents sometimes say things they don't mean when they're disappointed, and that they'd always wanted the best for me. I asked her what the best for me looked like in her mind. She said a stable career, a good reputation, contributing to the family legacy. I asked her if she thought being a failure who was good for cleaning toilets counted as contributing to the family legacy, since those were her exact words at the door. She started crying harder and said she'd said that in anger because I'd shown up without warning and she was caught off guard. I pointed out that being caught off guard doesn't make someone suddenly cruel unless the cruelty was already there. My Aunt Renee tried to jump in and say that everyone was focusing too much on what was said, and not enough on how to fix things moving forward. I turned to her and asked what exactly needed to be fixed. She said the family was falling apart, that my parents were struggling financially, that Kyle was dealing with professional stress, that Noelle's wedding was in jeopardy, and that I was the only one who could help stop it. I asked her why any of that was my responsibility. She said because I was the one who'd caused it by spreading information about them. That's when I laid out exactly what I'd done. I told everyone at that table that I hadn't lied about anything, hadn't made anything up, hadn't done anything illegal. I'd simply shared factual information about their financial situations with people who had legitimate reasons to know. I told them that if the truth about their lives was damaging enough to cause all these problems, then maybe the problem wasn't the truth. It was the lives they'd built on lies. My dad's face went red, and he said I had no right to dig into their personal finances or share that information with anyone. I told him I had every right to protect myself and my professional reputation by making sure people knew the real situation. I asked him if he wanted to explain to everyone at the table why his sales numbers had been declining for 3 years, while he told the family he was doing better than ever. He started to argue, but my grandfather interrupted and said he wanted to hear the answer to that question too. My dad tried to redirect and say this wasn't about his job performance, it was about family betrayal. My grandfather said that lying to family about your financial situation while borrowing money from them sounded like betrayal to him. The whole dynamic shifted right there. My grandmother asked my mom directly if the boutique had ever made a profit in any year it had been open. My mom stammered and said some years were better than others and that retail was difficult. My grandmother asked again, yes or no, had it ever made a profit? My mom finally admitted it hadn't, but she said it was building toward profitability and just needed more time and support. I pulled out my phone and showed them the numbers. The actual financial records I'd compiled, showing loan amounts, repayment schedules, revenue versus expenses. I showed them how much money my grandparents had poured into a business that was never going to succeed because the business model was fundamentally broken. I showed them the mortgage records on my parents' house. I showed them Kyle's debt situation. I showed them everything. Noelle finally looked at me and asked why I was doing this. What did I get out of destroying everyone's lives? I told her I got to watch people who treated me like garbage face consequences for their actions. I told her I got to see them panic and scramble and beg for help from the person they'd called a failure. I told her I got 5 years of vindication in 1 month of watching their perfect little world crumble. She said I was cruel and that I was enjoying hurting people. I agreed completely. I told her I'd spent 5 years angry and I was finally getting to act on that anger in a way that mattered. I told her that every phone call, every voicemail, every relative reaching out to tell me to stop, it all just confirmed that what I was doing was working. My mom asked me what I wanted from them, what would make me stop. And I told her the truth, which is that there was nothing they could do to make me stop. Because I'd already decided 5 years ago that if they ever contacted me again, I would dismantle everything they'd built. I told her that her voicemail asking me to help Kyle with his loans was the trigger I'd been waiting for, the proof that they only cared about me when I had something they wanted. My dad slammed his hand on the table and said I was acting like a spoiled child throwing a tantrum. I asked him if adults who throw coins at their own son get to call anyone else spoiled. He said I needed to grow up and stop punishing them for one bad visit. I told him it wasn't one bad visit. It was 5 years of silence followed by 20 minutes that proved nothing had changed. Kyle tried a different approach. He said that fine. They'd all made mistakes, and if I wanted to be angry, then I had that right. But destroying their lives wasn't going to make me feel better or fix anything. He said revenge was hollow, and that I'd regret this eventually. I told him I'd been planning this for 5 years and hadn't regretted a single moment of it yet. He said that proved I needed help, that I was obsessing over something unhealthy instead of moving on with my life. I laughed at that. I told him that my life was great, that I owned my house outright, that I made more money than our dad ever did, that I had a successful career and genuine professional respect, and that none of that was despite their treatment of me but because of it. I told him I'd spent 5 years using my anger as motivation to build something real while they were all busy pretending to be successful. The conversation went in circles for another hour. My parents kept trying to find some angle that would make me back down. Kyle kept trying to sound reasonable while implying I was unstable. Noelle cried about her wedding. My Aunt Renee tried to mediate, but she clearly had no idea how to handle the situation. My grandparents mostly stayed quiet until near the end when my grandfather asked me one direct question. Was I going to continue taking action against the family? I told him yes. I told him I had more information I hadn't used yet, more connections I could activate, more pressure I could apply. I told him that my dad's company was going to find out about his false sales numbers within the next few days because I'd already sent the real data to the right people. I told him that Kyle's hospital administration was going to get a detailed breakdown of his financial situation from a source they couldn't ignore. I told him that Noelle's future in-laws were going to receive a complete picture of exactly what kind of financial instability they were allying themselves with. My mom begged me to stop. She actually got down on her knees next to the table and begged me not to do this to them. She said she was sorry for everything, that she'd been a bad mother, that she'd failed me, and that she'd spend the rest of her life trying to make it up to me if I would just please stop destroying their lives. My dad pulled her back into her seat and told her to have some dignity. I stood up and told them I was done with this meeting. I said everything I'd told them I was going to do was going to happen regardless of what they said or did. I told them they'd had 5 years to reach out and be decent human beings, and they'd chosen to be cruel instead. I told them that the consequences they were facing were entirely earned and that I felt zero guilt about any of it. Kyle stood up and said this wasn't over, that he wasn't going to let me destroy the family without fighting back. I told him to do his worst and walked out. That was Saturday. By Monday morning, my dad's company had called him in for a meeting about discrepancies in his sales reporting. By Tuesday, my mom's boutique had officially closed after my grandfather pulled all remaining support and made it clear he wouldn't provide any more money. By Wednesday, Kyle's hospital had received an anonymous but detailed report about his debt situation that raised questions about his judgment and stability. And Wednesday night, Noelle's future in-laws called off the engagement entirely. Not postponed, not scaled down, completely done. They told her fiancé that they'd reviewed the financial situation and the family dynamics and decided this wasn't an appropriate match for their family. Her fiancé apparently tried to argue that Noelle wasn't responsible for her family's problems, but his parents held firm. By Thursday morning, Noelle's engagement was over. Thursday afternoon, my parents' house went into foreclosure proceedings. The second mortgage coupled with my dad's job situation meant they couldn't make payments anymore, and the bank moved fast. Kyle's residency program put him on probation, pending a review of his financial stability. My mom had a breakdown and ended up spending a night in the hospital because she couldn't stop crying. And last night, Friday night, at almost 11 p.m., my security camera caught them pulling up to my house. All four of them. My parents, Kyle, and Noelle. They got out of one car, my dad's sedan, and they walked up to my front door. I was in my living room when the doorbell rang. I pulled up the camera feed on my phone and watched them standing there. My mom rang the bell 3 more times, then started knocking. Then she started calling my name. Then she started crying and begging me to open the door. I watched them through the camera. My dad was pacing on my front walkway. Kyle had his hands in his pockets looking defeated. Noelle was crying next to my mom, and my mom was literally on her knees on my front porch calling my name and begging me to please talk to them, please help them, please show them mercy. She said they were sorry. that they were so sorry for everything they'd done. She said they were wrong about me, wrong about everything, and that they'd been terrible parents and terrible people. She said they'd lost everything, and they needed my help. She said I was the only one who could fix this, that I was the only one who had the connections and the ability to stop what was happening to them. My dad tried to pull her up, but she wouldn't move. She kept saying my name over and over. She said they'd been monsters to me, and that they deserved everything that was happening, but that she was begging me as her son to please have mercy on them. She said they had nowhere to go, that they were going to lose the house, that Kyle might lose his medical career, that Noelle's life was destroyed, and that it was all their fault, but please, please would I help them? Kyle tried the door handle. It was locked, obviously. He called out that he knew I was home because my truck was in the driveway. He said we needed to talk face to face like men and work this out. He said that whatever I thought I was accomplishing, this wasn't it, and that destroying family was something I'd regret forever. I sat on my couch watching them through my phone. My mom was wailing now, actual wailing, saying they were sorry, they were so sorry, they'd do anything I wanted. They'd admit everything publicly, they'd tell everyone they'd been wrong about me, anything at all, if I would just please open the door. Noelle sat down on the porch steps and put her head in her hands. My dad kept trying to get my mom to stand up and leave with dignity, but she refused. She stayed there on her knees calling my name for almost 20 minutes. I turned off my phone and sat in the dark living room listening to them outside. Eventually, my dad got my mom back to the car. Kyle was the last one to leave. He stood on my porch for a full minute staring at my front door before he finally walked away. They drove off around midnight. I checked the camera feed to make sure they were really gone. Then I sat there for another hour thinking about everything that had happened. Here's what I want everyone to understand. I don't feel guilty. I don't feel bad for them. I don't regret anything I've done. They spent 5 years treating me like I didn't exist. And when I finally came home, they proved they were still the same cruel people who valued appearances over reality. Everything that's happening to them is because of choices they made, lies they told, and a lifestyle they built on borrowed money and fake success. The fact that they're facing consequences now isn't my fault, it's theirs. I just accelerated the timeline and made sure the right information reached the right people. Their house of cards was always going to collapse. I just gave it a push. My mom on her knees begging me to help them is exactly what I spent 5 years working toward. And seeing it happen, actually watching it through my security camera, was everything I'd hoped it would be and more. Because now they know what it feels like to be powerless. Now they know what it's like to beg someone for help and be ignored. Now they understand that the family janitor they mocked has more control over their lives than they ever had over mine. I'm not opening my door for them. I'm not taking their calls. I'm not helping them fix anything. They made this mess through years of lies and cruelty and fake superiority, and they can figure out how to live with the consequences on their own. I left home 5 years ago to build something real. I succeeded. They stayed home maintaining their fake perfect image. They failed. And now the whole world gets to see what they really are without all the borrowed money and false pretenses holding it together. So yeah, they showed up at my door begging for mercy, and I watched them through my camera and did nothing. Because that's exactly what they did for me for 5 years. And turnabout is fair play. The family janitor doesn't clean up messes anymore. I just make sure everyone can see how dirty things really are.